How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Heliopolis Radio. Today, we've been fortunate to be joined by Jill Sitnick. She's here to talk about the use of psychedelics in healing and treating PTSD as a recovered patient herself. She's also the author of Rescuing Jill, a book she recently released, just basically detailing her journey. And she's been kind enough just to come share a bit about psychedelics, perhaps a bit also if you're comfortable with the nature of PTSD and how psychedelics have helped you overcome a lot of the difficulties that come with this. So without further ado, uh, tell us about yourself, Jill. And yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is going to be a great conversation. The story that people most want to know about me is how did I get into psychedelics? And it's not nearly an exciting story. In my late 40s, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I argued with my therapist. I read a couple of books and realized, my bad childhood directly impacting me as an adult.
Hmm.
My therapist at the time was training to become a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. She had me go read some research over at maps.org. I decided to go ahead with the treatment primarily because nothing else was working. We were several months into talk therapy at that point, and my fight or flight, my PTSD symptoms, which we can talk about, were still there.
Hmm.
And long story short, after 1 year and three therapeutic journeys, I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. I was no longer suicidal. I thought that I had some control over my life and there was a future. And those were kind of the benchmarks for us. So that's me in a very quick, short
Wow.
little package because that
Wow.
answers the questions that most people have right off the bat.
Yeah, no, you did. Well, I mean, that's actually very intense. And you obviously mentioned what brought you into psychedelics. And what psychedelics have you tried throughout your journey? Because there are a whole wide range that have different varying ex effects and experiences. So I don't know if you'd be
Yeah.
willing to share that.
Really, really important question. So, my treatment for PTSD was done primarily with the psychedelic called MDMA.
Hmm.
The street names would be ecstasy. Oh my goodness, it's early in the morning. I apologize for that.
No, no worries. No
Ecstasy
worries.
or Molly are kind of like the street names. I had full-fledged, straight up MDMA, not laced with any. I like to call it medical grade because my guide. I worked with two people, my therapist and my guide. My guide was a doctor or is still a doctor, and so I knew that the MDMA I was receiving wouldn't have anything else in it. MDMA is short for this word that is like massive. It's a synthetic compound developed in the early 1900s. So it's not something that grows out of the ground. And Rick Doblin, who runs MAPS.org, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, the folks who
Hmm.
do the clinical trials, he likes to say that MDMA is like a warm hug. And the reason I'm doing this is because for trauma patients, PTSD patients, MDMA calms the body down. And I always do this too, because I feel like for most of my life, my shoulders were up to my ears with stress and there was a fire in my neck and all that kind of stuff. And what
Mm.
MDMA does in a trauma or a therapeutic journey, and I'm using the word journey therapeutically. Very often people use the word trip if they're using psychedelics
Hmm.
recreationally. MDMA calms the body down enough for the trauma patient to be able to finally be able to talk about really, really scary stuff. So,
Hmm.
like, it was the first time I was actually able to verbalize that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if my father was in that room with me, he would have his hands around my neck.
Hmm.
Whereas without that medication, without the MDMA in my system, I would not have been able to even come close to admitting that fear that I had. So that's how MDMA works. There are no visuals. I was very coherent. The journey is a mix of kind of putting on an eye mask and kind of sitting and relaxing, not really
Hmm.
sleeping, but sitting and relaxing. And me, because I'm chatty,
Hmm.
pulling my eye mask up and chatting with my doctors. A lot of other psychedelics have much more visuals. So you asked what other psychedelics I've done since this treatment.
Hmm.
So the very third journey of my treatment, we did do a little bit of magic mushrooms. I had a really tough trauma point that the MDMA session, we were not making progress and we had talked about it. And that was, I mean, a very small dose of magic mushrooms. And that gave me the visual of like escaping my parents' house when I was a
Mm,
kid after some of the normal stereotypical neon color kind of visuals.
mm.
I've tried other psychedelics. I've tried well, magic mushrooms. I tried bufo.
Oh, the
I tried
toad, right?
regular DMT, the toad, and
Mm,
regular DMT, and then trauma healing with MDMA versus bufo. So bufo, I also didn't have the visuals that people think about, but the way that I responded in terms of my trauma healing, MDMA puts the memory kind of on a TV screen, kind of like I'm looking at the memory from an adult perspective.
mm,
Bufo actually put in the memory, but as opposed to looking at my father coming at me as like that 16-year-old, the 53-year-old Jill was looking at it going, boy, my dad's really a jerk. I really incorporate. I'm looking up because like my father was very tall.
mm.
UFO puts you in the memory with your perspective. It's fascinating. So I'm not completely schooled in all psychedelics in any way, shape, or form. And my focus is very much like, how do they deal with trauma? So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the best. I'm not completely schooled in a whole bunch of different psychedelics. I hope that helps.
No, no, and thank you for sharing that. That's it's tough. It's very difficult to talk about difficult childhood experiences, I think. And the way you're describing each aspect of it, you can actually understand from if you've for those of you that have experienced trauma, you can understand how the psyche is starting to process these things from an intellectual perspective. I mean, we have the physical memory, we have the emotional memory which we kind of get lost in. But now the way you're describing it, it seems that MDMA gave you that insight that almost experienced the event, but was not attached to what was happening. It was almost like it was above it, transcended. I don't know if that word is the right word. But I was gonna
It's
go ahead.
almost, yeah, you nailed it right on the head. It's almost like, you know when the way I explain it is imagine in your house, your apartment, wherever you're living, right? And there's something scary that goes on at night. There's a knock on the door, you think somebody's trying to break in or something, right? Your heart rate goes up, you're immediately alert. For me, I'm looking for the baseball bat, whatever, you're on a level 10. But if you see in a television show an actor or actress dealing with somebody trying to break into a
Hmm.
home, it's your emotional level, like a 1 or a 2. And that's the difference. MDMA let me see memories at a 1 or a 2
Hmm.
because I was no longer a child. So I wasn't seeing the memory, must be against me. No, I'm looking at it from a 53-year-old view saying, no, my father was a jerk.
Mm. No,
So,
and that's I guess it's obviously again thank you for sharing these things and just being open with it. And I was gonna ask, were there any negative side effects that you've experienced? Because we see, it goes one way for someone and it goes another way for someone else. Everyone's very different. But I was just gonna ask, in your own personal journey, are there any psychedelics or even if it's all of them entirely, within your experience, was there any negative component to it that perhaps you had to deal with, or it was completely, it was more of ultimately a positive experience?
yeah. So there's a couple of things to unpack there because number one, we hear sometimes the most outrageous stories. If you go on Reddit and you start
Mm,
exploring, you're going to hear some horrendous stories. So the first thing I need to say is, when you hear about someone acting a little crazy or inappropriate when they have had too much to drink,
hmm.
what's the first question?
How
First
much?
question is usually, well, how much did they? Right. Okay. So keep that in mind. Second question is, what were they kind of doing? Were they hanging out at 3 a.m. at some place they knew they shouldn't have been? Or were they like at home? So that's kind of set and setting is super, super important when you're
Mm.
talking about psychedelics. So in my case, I was cleared or I was screened. My family doesn't have any schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any psychosis. My only diagnosis was PTSD. So that's number one, a proper diagnosis. Number two, I was diagnosed with PTSD in the spring, and my first journey was not until September. There was a lot of talk therapy before that journey, getting me ready, talking about my issues, talking about my fears. My main intentions for most of my journeys were about fear.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of, I like to say, I had a lot of runway, and I encourage that. Like, I think it wouldn't have been as good for me with my protections if I had been diagnosed with PTSD and then, like, the next month go and do a journey.
Mm.
I was very, very safe. Secondly, I had an incredible trusting relationship, or I guess third. You know what? I was English major. Forgive me for not keeping count well. um, I had a incredibly strong trusting relationship with my therapist, who I had been seeing for years to deal with my grief work. My partner had passed away. I had gone to her to
Wow.
deal with the grief
Sorry
initially.
about that. Yeah.
And I had several sessions with my guide. So I knew these people going in. So at that point, it just comes down to, were there any sort of memories or anything during the journey that I would have found challenging? And that was not the case for me. I'm not as in a situation where I'm discovering for the first time there was abuse or uh, wanting to avoid it. Like, I definitely wanted to go head on and just deal with it. And
Mm.
then in terms of like after, because you do hear people talk about the idea that they've got, issues moving forward, and there is a small percentage of people who are going through the clinical trials who are also experiencing some sort of after effect. For me, I took the supplements that my therapist and guide told me to. I took time off from work right after the journey so that I could sit, relax, I could process. And again, I was supported.
Mm.
So a lot of people who are kind of doing what I call, what's the word I like, therapy tourism, where they're kind of going somewhere, but there's no ongoing relationship or there's no
Mm.
ongoing support. I think that's kind of a little bit of a red flag for me in
Mm.
terms of, I know people really want healing and they really want to move fast and all that kind of stuff. I would just say that in a supportive environment, the outcome can be very different than if you're kind of like just jumping in with people you don't know. It's not to say that there isn't a negative outcome per se for a small percentage of people in a therapeutic environment. Same way with any therapeutic environment or any medical procedure. Um, I was just, my doctors took it very slow with me.
Incredible. Um, and thank you for really highlighting a very well thought out process. I think a lot of, like you mentioned, with psychedelics in general, it's more of an entertainment, but people aren't ready for the potency of it. And I can also personally attest to that. I mean, I haven't done too many, but I remember my first experience with psychedelics, I think it was magic mushrooms. I don't know what
Uh,
dose we took, but oh my God.
See, you don't know the dose.
I don't even know what we took with just being varsity students being completely foolish, but I guess what it does show you is the nature of the mind and the power behind experience and its imprints on our psyche. Which is actually going to lead me to the next question was, um, how have you, like in terms of your cycling and dosage, how have you incorporated it into treating the PTSD? Was there a certain amount that you prescribed that you took at a certain date and then you take a break, or how would you organize that whole cycle? Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the therapy protocol. I think that's a
Mm.
fantastic question. And that was actually the reason I wrote the memoir, was to actually explain the therapy protocol. And instead, people get all caught up in like how much of a jerk my father was. So it's kind of fun.
Mm.
All right. So I had three journeys. Let's look at like one journey. Let's take the whole medical procedure of one journey. it winds up working out of like a 40, 20, 40% kind of timeline.
Mm-hmm.
40% for the journey is the talk therapy, getting ready for it, talking about your intentions, dealing with what you think you want to heal. And
Mm-hmm.
usually there's some sort of blockage. For me, with the PTSD, I was 1,000% sure that the universe was out to get me and I would be in poverty like I was back when I was a kid. Like I was a
Mm-hmm.
1,000% sure. So that was the
Mm-hmm.
blockage. I couldn't get over that. I was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
20% of the entire treatment is the actual journey day. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the day that can last anywhere from 5 to 8 hours with my guide and my therapist. I interchangeably call them doctors and guides. Like I just mess up that vocabulary. And that's the day where I take a prescribed amount of MDMA as per my weight. And I have a journey with two trusting people.
Mm-hmm.
After that day is what's called the integration. The last 40% is called integration. Most people can wrap their head around integration if I talk about physical therapy,
Mm-hmm.
that, you have to put some work in, you have to stretch, or you have to kind of work a muscle. Integration with psychedelics is that you need to give your brain the opportunity to think about and integrate those shifts, those change in perspectives into regular life. The
Mm-hmm.
mistake I see a lot of people do is that they're like 2 weeks after an MDMA journey, they're like, I'm ready for more. I'm like, you haven't even started your integration.
Mm-hmm.
You have to live life and experience your regular triggers or the regular way that you would do something to kind of see patterns. To give an illustration, that last 40%, my first journey was September. My second journey wasn't until December. My third journey wasn't until May the following year. So don't people kind of want to jump in and kind of want to rush the system. Give integration the time that it deserves, the same way that you would give physical therapy. You wouldn't immediately, if you broke your leg, you wouldn't expect to be running a marathon in 2 months. So
Mm-hmm.
like you have to kind of give it time. Did that 40, 20, 40 kind of help outline the
Yeah,
therapeutic
no, it did,
journey?
and it was so well, it was perfectly said. I like the fact, I mean, just from the outside looking in, how you disciplined yourself enough not to chase the I guess what's the word? I don't want to describe it, but the psyche, like the I don't want to say what's the word? The component that
The
stimulates the
experience.
brain.
I wasn't
Yeah,
I wasn't
like
tasting the experience.
you were chasing a disciplined way of handling the experience before and after. I think that whole before and
Yeah.
after part, and I think, because I was going to actually ask in terms of its effect on people, with the people that you work with, what percentage of people, if you could give maybe a rough estimate or maybe just an indication, how many people come out with little to no impact on their psychological behavior, like in terms of, like you mentioned, schizophrenia is one, sometimes depression is also another, because again, you're going into your mind and you're experiencing things, that are not
Yeah.
necessarily normal in everyday waking life. So do you know any instances of people maybe coming out on the wrong end of it, or is it majority of the people that go through this procedure that you went through yourself, they usually come out more successful because of the process
Yeah.
itself?
Yeah. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can go to maps.org, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. That's the organization that the in the US, the FDA,
Mhm.
Federal Drug Administration Association. I've got to figure out what the A means. I always just say the FDA. The FDA labeled MDMA therapy for PTSD as breakthrough therapy years ago. That means that the FDA recognized that there was no other treatment available in the US that could impact positively PTSD in that way. So I'm mentioning that because on Maps's website, listen to that grammar. On their website, they have their clinical trial research. And I mean, usually I just round it because I was English major and I'm like 3/4 of the people in the clinical trials had some sort of a positive outcome, or
Mm.
actually no longer, like me, didn't qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. And what you have to realize about clinical trials is that dosage is the same across the board. So
Mm-hmm.
dosage for me versus dosage for somebody that's,
Mm-hmm.
a bodybuilder and has 60 pounds on me, we would have the same dosage in a clinical trial. So you can kind of start to understand why it would make sense. There would be a difference in healing modality. But
Mm-hmm.
3/4, I think, for a clinical trial is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you mentioned,
75%, basically, almost 75%. Yeah.
55%. Yeah. And it's higher. I'm just rounding down because I was English major. But you
Mm-hmm.
can go see all of that research on maps.org and in the journal called Nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they actually published the paper that is like all research based and is like up here. Like Jill can't understand all that stuff. But you also mentioned magic mushrooms. So MAPS, I always do this. MAPS got breakthrough therapy designation for MDMA. Johns Hopkins University got breakthrough designation for psilocybin magic mushrooms for depression. So the FDA has been very much aware that these compounds have, um, the potential for healing. And now, when you just do a simple internet search, there are dozens and dozens of clinical trials that are happening now. The Veterans Association has actually decided they're going to start doing some research because, as much as I'm kind of like, well, the research is already out there. No, it's one clinical trial that's kind of moved all the way through. There's lots of different things that can be tested, lots of different substances. So I think we're at the bottom of the mountain. And I think the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see a huge increase in clinical trials that will address what you were talking about. Like, well, were there any sort of negatives, and how do people respond? Like, I think we're going to get the answer to that kind of question when more and more research is documented. So I would say people go look at what's available now and really keep an eye out for what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
No, that's thank you for answering that. And I guess this one's a bit maybe I don't know, maybe it's an odd question, but I felt like it'd be interesting to ask. There's
Sure.
the whole thing about organic versus inorganic, man-made versus natural.
Yep.
In your experience, in terms of MDMA being designed in a lab and
Yep.
mushrooms being a product of nature, in your experience, I mean, they do two different things, so I can't ask, which one's better or not. But in terms of integrating, what was more easier to integrate, the experiences from MDMA or the experiences from mushrooms?
Oh, huh. Good job. I have not that question before. Easy. Do you want me to define it in terms of easier, or do you want me to define it in terms of how?
Probably just, I think easier just means something that probably took less time to process than something else. I think that's how I would
Oh,
define easy in quotation marks.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let's go with that definition then. Okay.
Yeah.
In my experience, because that first year was primarily MDMA, I'm going to say that the MDMA integration lasted far longer for me while dealing very specifically with PTSD symptoms.
Mhm.
Mushrooms for me, and I have since, after my treatment, I mean, I dealt with like the capital T issues during my treatment. I still had some capital T issues. I continued to do some journeys after my actual diagnosis was done. I just kind of waited way longer. It was like my next journey wasn't until like 8 months later. And now, magic mushrooms for me are psilocybin. There's a phrase that I read somewhere that kind of really aligns. It's I use like a little mini, very tiny journey occasionally, like maybe every 6 or 8 months kind of thing seems to be my timeline, to kind of like clear the cobwebs. And I will come out of a psilocybin journey pretty much getting the answer that I was looking for. And maybe my integration is like a week, but I'm also not healing right now the big giant capital T's with a
Mm.
psilocybin journey. So right now, for me, being kind of experienced in this and knowing what I want to get out of it, things happen a little faster. I think if you're kind of new to it or it's the first time, things might unfold a little bit slowly. But again, if you have a true PTSD diagnosis, and MDMA integration can last months appropriately,
Mm.
because you have to live. I hope that answered it.
No, no, it did. And I
Okay.
was just gonna follow through with that because a lot of people who I've spoken to who have done MDMA and mushrooms and DMT, they talk about masculine and feminine ways of healing. And I know that's kind of out there. It's not necessarily scientifically, in terms of tech, the lingo and everything. But for conversation's sake and for those of people that do tune in, would you say from what I have been told, that it's the mushrooms have a more feminine component, so they draw you into the journey. It's almost like an art, not an artistic way, but it's a very non-forceful way of having to kind of go through something. And people who have taken MDMA, they'd say that it was kind of laser precision into like breaking down things into detail. It's not like, come in and let's talk about it. It's just, this is what it is, this, that, this, and then it's almost like a masculine mental. So I don't know if you maybe can attest to that.
Oh my gosh, I never attributed gender identity to it,
Yeah.
but one of the things after my second journey, I tried to hack it. I was like, after my first journey, and I was like, oh my gosh, this works. My second journey, I kind of wanted to understand how my mind worked a little bit.
Mm,
Major mistake. Like I tried to stay more awake during the journey. Major mistake. Yeah, it really was in no way, shape, or form helpful to me whatsoever. But when I left that second journey, I was sitting in the car, and I don't know why I had this memory. I had this memory of when I was a kid and trying to find the hole in a tire, like a pinprick in a tire,
mm,
and putting a tire in water to find where the air bubbles are, to find where the hole in the tire is.
mhm,
And what my brain was telling me, my brain works in imagery, subconscious works
mhm,
in imagery, like most of us. My brain was telling me, don't worry, the MDMA has found the memories or found what it needs to work on. Just relax. We now know what memories to focus on moving forward. And I never really thought of that as a feminine. Um, I will say though, for folks who were talking about mushrooms kind of taking over, it does depend on how you are taking them.
mhm,
There are a couple of different ways that you can take them. There's also different dosages, obviously. Uh, so the experience can, if you happen to have some cocoa with you, it can be a much more pleasant experience getting
mm,
into, depending on your dosage. So I don't know. That's a really interesting thing. I've never thought of it. I will say on DMT, I had a
mhm,
lovely experience, psychedelic tourism in Mexico. And I have a base journey of psilocybin with then a little bit of DMT, which I had never tried before. That was a very feminine experience for me.
mhm.
That's what I needed to work on. I don't know if other people would define it that way. I don't know. That's a great
Um,
question. We could
no,
talk on
no.
that one.
No, no, you actually defined it because a lot of people who have taken DMT, a lot of, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but a lot of people that do know have been willing to take the journey because from what they say, DMT, I mean, they do call it like the absolute truth or final truth. I don't know if that is true or not, but they basically define it as being taken out of your body and being
Yes.
made to see. I don't know. So,
Yes. It's
yeah,
a
it's
fascinating. It's a fascinating, and in a safe environment, it can be delightful.
wow. And you're the first person that's really said like it was because everyone else told me they're like, man, it was the most difficult thing I've had to go through, but I needed to go through it. You're the first person who said it was in the right space and it was actually an enjoyable experience, I'll be honest.
Oh,
So,
lovely, lovely. Again, set and setting. If you're in a safe place, if you have appropriate dosage, if you've done, I wouldn't. Here's what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't be somebody brand new to psychedelics and go right to DMT.
yeah. I think that's what some people have done, and it's you can go. I mean, yeah. I mean, I
I don't
wouldn't
know if
know.
I would do that. I would ease in with like a couple of mini smaller magic mushroom journeys before going straight off to DMT. I would encourage that.
Oh, no. And so that was actually going to be my next question was what are your thoughts of consumption of psychedelics in
Huh?
particularly in the youth demographic of our society today? Do you think that perhaps the reason why younger people are consuming it now is just there's a lot more trauma that is being experienced within the youth, and now that access to psychedelics is much, much easier than it was before, because of, legalities and everything. Do you think that indicates a deeper problem within our society and the real need for trauma to be attended to? Or do you think that it's being abused and people aren't respecting the healing power of it and the repercussions are quite, maybe negative?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that question. Number one, so I'm Generation X. I'm
Mm,
old at this. I think younger generations, at least from what I see on social media, are much more aware that trauma exists. And so at least the conversations are happening. Whereas when I grew up, I mean, I just thought I had a bad childhood. People had it far worse. Like I had no idea. When I tell some of my childhood stories and people kind of look at me like, ooh, like it
mm,
didn't register. So the first part of the question I'll answer is that I think younger generations are getting a better understanding of trauma than certainly my generation.
mm,
Secondly, I think that anything that is labeled, and this is very much my opinion, anything that's labeled illegal is automatically a little bit of a lighthouse for people who kind of want to live on the edge or kind of want to push the
mm,
envelope. And that's certainly what we all do when we're younger.
mm,
Hopefully, we all have experience of pushing an envelope in some way, shape, or form.
mm,
Number three, everybody can grow mushrooms. So
mm,
it's not hard to, well, it's hard to do in terms of you're like not good with, if you don't have a green thumb, like I don't have a green thumb, but theoretically, everybody can grow mushrooms. It can be available very easily.
mm,
And mushrooms are not the kind of thing that you can abuse. What winds up happening with mushrooms, if you take too much of them, they start losing their power. Like you
mm,
have to stop yourself. There's just no joy in it. You don't get anything
mm,
from it. It's the
mm,
complete opposite from alcohol. So I don't know if I see people abusing magic mushrooms. You don't see people going to emergency rooms on magic mushroom trips or anything of that sort. When you start talking about some of the other drugs like MDMA, unfortunately, we have bad actors who are mixing MDMA with other things.
mm,
You don't necessarily know how much of the MDMA substance is literally in the capsule that you're taking. So you can take way too much and have way too much of a serotonin
mm,
release and not feel great.
mm,
In Australia, they just had people at a music festival. They took MDMA that was laced with something else. I mean, I see that as a much bigger danger, getting the substance and not knowing what else is in it. In a
mm,
perfect world, the same way that you take uh, a pain medication or the same way you take a sleeping medication, there's dosage guidelines on that medication. If we had a system with, especially with MDMA, and I don't see this happening, it's going to be scheduled so that only practitioners can use it. But
mm,
maybe like 50 years from now, if you had an actual 1,000% knowledge that that medicine is actually MDMA and you had dosing guidelines, you would see people healing trauma like crazy. And we're just dealing right now with the fact, like Generation X. I grew up with the egg in the frying pan. Like I was petrified of drugs. I was petrified as
mm,
even my first journey. I was like, I don't know
mm,
what, a little too much neon for me. I don't know what's going to happen here, right? Before that's why it took from March until September to get me to do my first journey. So we're kind of dealing with a lot of all those stereotypes. But realistically, if you look at a substance like MDMA as a medical procedure or a medicine, the next phase is okay, what are proper dosages? What are proper guidelines? And I think at that point, we would have generations healing so much trauma, so much. I hope I answered the question. I kind of like to
No,
talk about.
no, no. You've been answering every question you've answered has been beyond like 100%, it's been 150%. Um,
Okay.
and so just coming to your book, obviously that's kind of a big thing. what inspired you to write it, and how was the process of writing it in terms of just your healing journey as well, just reflecting on what you've gone through in order to be a healthier, happier version of yourself?
All right. So when and if any of your listeners go do a journey with the goal of it having kind of being therapeutic, after the journey, in some way, shape, or form, try to capture the integration. For me, I was an English major. I'm a journaler.
Hmm.
And I do this because I type faster than I write. So I was journaling like crazy. At the end of my third journey, I literally sat up. I was talking to my doctors because I knew there was a shift. I didn't exactly understand what it was at the time, but I said to my doctors, people need to understand that this is a viable healing modality, and they need to hear the Jill Sitnick, corporate girly, type A. I'm not going to listen to somebody who, and I hate to be stereotypical, but this is the way I put it in the journey. I'm not going to listen to somebody who's got rainbow hair and lots of piercings. I'm going to
Hmm.
listen to somebody else that's kind of like me,
Hmm.
corporate girl, type A. Like I'm going to list. That's just the way it is, kind of,
Hmm.
how we account. And I said, this is the first thing I have ever found that actually works. My mother, her entire life, was labeled depressive. She tried to commit suicide 3 years before she died of COPD. Like she was
Hmm.
never actually healed. And so to find something that actually worked, I said to myself, if I just take this healing and I don't try to give back and I don't try to fight the stigma of psychedelics, then kind of my healing is super selfish.
Hmm.
Um, and I was an English major. I always knew there was a book in me. So what I did, I joined a writing group. I took my journals that were like an absolute mess because with integration, you're kind of repeating yourself. You're rewiring your brain during integration. So you're like repeating things over and over again. Same way when you're learning things and you have like need the flashcards and repetition. Same way with integration, you might be thinking about something over and over again. So I basically looked at all my journals. I pulled out the kind of the highlights or the things that I thought people would understand. Because like if I talked about every single thing, the book would have been 1,000 pages, and nobody's got time for that. So
Hmm.
like I pulled out the most important things. I did it chronologically. People have said to me that they're like talking back to the book. Like, of course it wasn't your fault that your father was doing
Hmm.
XYZ.
Hmm.
And my point with writing the book while I was in or having the book be like when I was in the moment was so that people could actually see the trauma thinking versus reality.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah. And so that's why I wrote it. I kept it short and sweet. I self-published it because short and sweet memoirs are usually not published. And I wanted to be able to say exactly how things happened without having a publisher want to try to change the story.
Wow.
And that's pretty much how it happened.
Amazing.
It's my story. It's out there.
No, you are a very, very strong individual, Jill. I've always noticed people will have a positive demeanor. People always ask where they get it from. And they just can't tell you their life story. And you're like, wow, man. I mean, you have to develop a way and a certain type of mindset to be able to
Yeah.
process a lot of things that have happened in life. And so I really do respect it. I mean, past your demeanor, I guess I can truly feel the essence of your strength, and your willingness to, yeah, no, real recognize real. So, no, and so people can access the book. I know on Amazon.
Yep.
Amazon is a bit complicated here in South Africa because of different. So, is there an ebook version, or is that something that maybe someone can access on Google Reads, or I'm not too sure.
Oh, well, you know what? I haven't, that's my fault. I've been very lazy and just done the Amazon platform. But on my website, thejourneysage.com, I have 3 chapters from the book freely available for everybody. And I wrote a workbook. If anybody in your audience is actually thinking about doing a journey therapeutically, I wrote a workbook that has like 8 prompts as to how to set intentions. The body prompt, the prompt that my therapist and I used the most, That's also available on my website, a free download.
Mm.
So, and there is, I did record it. There is an audiobook. If that's easier, I'm not sure. But at the very least, there are a couple of things that people can access straight from my website to kind of get a flavor. Um, and you know what might be a heck of a lot easier? My YouTube channel. Go to my YouTube channel, The Journey Sage on YouTube. My longer form videos, I kind of deep dive into what integration is, what this therapy is, what helped me. So you might not get the memoir experience of my specific journey as it happened, but those videos can absolutely help people understand what this therapy is, and that's ultimately my goal. So that might be a better bet for folks.
No, I'll make sure to put that in the link in the description. And thank you for sharing that actually. And so I actually had two more questions. Obviously, time sake, I don't want to keep you too long. I know you
Sure.
have your day to attend to, but what has this healing journey taught you about yourself, delving into not only the difficulties and adversities that life has put you through? A lot of people that go through trauma, at least when you reflect, there's a deep, 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 deep level of, excuse my language, but what the fuck did I just go through? How am I still here today? And what does life mean? So excuse my language there. I had to put it, there's no other way to put it. Yeah, that's the one question. The last question I'll leave after. This is a short question, not as intense as that one.
You know what's in first of all, never have to apologize about the F-bomb with me, trust me. So it's been a few years since I actually went through this therapy. And since then, I have continued the same way that like bodybuilders find that working on their body as a hobby. I find working on my mind as a hobby. I don't like some of the patterns that were developed as protective strategies from my
Mm,
parents. My
mhm,
therapist likes to say we are all children wrapped up in layers, and that's so true.
mm.
And so it's interesting because right now I'm actually going to head out on a retreat, a Bufo
Nice.
retreat in a couple of weeks because I want to get a little deeper. I want to find out who Jill is or could have been before my parents kind of got a hold of me. And I know that sounds a
Mm,
little weird, but like I still respond to life, unfortunately, in some ways, in some instances, the same way that like that little toddler who, because we learn about life when we're little kids. And
mm,
unfortunately, I was marinated in a lot of neglect and abuse as a toddler.
mm,
And so I'm at the point with my healing and I want to get a little bit more of who I am before they kind of came along. And I'm super excited about that. Um, and again, it's almost become a hobby of like, so, every 6, 8 months, what can I learn more about myself versus how I respond in an environment because of things that were taught to me. I hope that
mm.
makes sense. I probably need
No,
to come up with a
no,
better way
no,
to
no,
explain it.
no. You're returning to the essence of who you were before you were, I don't want to use the word contaminated because it's a bit of a disjustice to the nature of life. I think life, trials and tribulations are ultimately the process we subscribe to when we're born, whether we like it or not. We have no choice, unfortunately. Just like
Yeah.
in nature, a buck is born and can be killed by a lion, can
Yeah.
survive. Anything can happen. I think returning to the core of who you are is really returning to peace, returning to the fact that, there was an intelligence before anything was put into you, and there's intelligence is what is probably, I don't know, I'm just going out of the back of my head. I could be talking out of my ass, but I'm trying to,
You know, we all tell stories. We all have stories in our head. Oh, I can't do that because, or oh, I'm going to do that because. Well, what if those stories were really not my stories? They were stories that were created by the people with whom I grew up. I'm trying to get a little bit underneath those stories right now. If that helps, if that
no,
vocabulary
no, no,
helps.
I completely get you on that one.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a really good answer. Last one, last but not least, any words of wisdom or advice for the listeners today? Just, food for thought.
Yeah. I know what's going to happen. So in Australia has already approved MDMA therapy for PTSD. The United States is set to approve it in August of this year, and then we're going to reschedule MDMA to enable practitioners. The infrastructure is, Australia is right now kind of dealing with the infrastructure of how that all gets done. We'll have to deal
Mm-hmm.
with it. It will be really available to people until at least 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Canada's looking at it. And I think as more countries approve it, it's going to start rolling across globally.
Mm-hmm.
So until that happens, I totally understand that people are like, well, I want this therapy now. So the first thing is you can take a look at psychedelic tourism. There are some lovely retreats. If they are not calling you to vet you beforehand, if they are not asking you for your medical history, if they're not asking you for what you want to achieve, ask all the questions. How are you going to be taken care of? How are you going to be supported? Like it's the same way that you're shopping for anything else, really vet it.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, if you're going to kind of say, all right, I'm just going to do this in my backyard. Because let's be honest, that's what's going to happen. That's what is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just be safe about it. Take an appropriate dose. It's very easy online to find appropriate dose calendars. You do not have to guess. Make sure you're with people who can support you. And, take a look. I have my workbook. I have that free body prompt online to help people out. I would just say don't jump into anything without doing a little bit of research, the same way that you wouldn't go to a medical doctor without probably doing a little bit of research. What do I have? What is this procedure? What's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Be smart about it, and don't take something. Not all psychedelics are built the same. LSD
Mm-hmm.
is way different than MDMA. So don't just assume that any chemical is going to be working to
Mm-hmm.
heal. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've never tried LSD. It's not on my bucket list because of the things that I hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
So just be really cautious and be safe. A little bit of preparation and a little bit of thought can really exponentially impact your results. That's kind of because I can say, oh, go ahead and wait. People aren't going to go ahead and wait. So that's why I
No, thank you
try.
so much. That's words of wisdom, guys. So those of you that are, doing it or considering doing it, it's always wise to listen to someone who has disciplined their mind and their compulsions and how they handle it. I think that's a big one. And just want to say thank you, Jill. It was really an awesome interview. You're a joyful personality. I'm wishing you all the best as you continue your personal evolution and your healing journey. And I'm glad to see psychedelics are starting to be integrated into society without the stigma, without the hype, more so as again, a medical process just to help people heal themselves. So, Jill, it'd be great to have you on again at some point in time, maybe after your next journey, share some cool stuff.
Yep.
Just don't be talking to aliens. I'm joking, I'm joking.
Usually it's more like ancestors for me,
No,
but
no, no,
they'll have me too.
I hear you, man. No, thank you so much.
This has been delightful. Thank you so much for a lovely morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.